A woman pressed the barrel of a revolver against a stranger's chest in the middle of the desert, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold it straight. She was starving. He was her only chance. One squeeze of the trigger and she'd have his wagon, his supplies, maybe enough to survive another week. But her vision blurred, her knees buckled, and instead of shooting her dead, the man caught her before she hit the ground. In a world where mercy got you killed, Caleb Rourke had just made the kind of mistake that changes everything. If you want to see how far a single act of compassion can go in a place built on betrayal, stay with me to the end. And when you're done, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story can travel. The Arizona Territory didn't forgive weakness. It chewed up the soft and spat out bones, and Mara Vale had been running on fumes for longer than she cared to admit. 3 days without food, 2 without water that didn't taste like rust and silt. Her lips were cracked, her skin burned raw, and somewhere between the last town and this godforsaken stretch of sand, she'd lost the ability to care whether she lived or died. But she still had the revolver. It was old, the barrel scratched to hell, and she wasn't even sure it would fire. But it was heavy in her hand, and that was enough. When she saw the wagon crest the ridge, a single man, no escort, no witnesses, she knew what she had to do. Mara stepped into the middle of the trail and raised the gun. The wagon slowed. The man driving it didn't look surprised, which should have been her first warning. He was broad-shouldered, sun-darkened, with a hat pulled low and a face that had seen its share of trouble. He didn't reach for a weapon. He just sat there, reins loose in his hands, watching her. "Step down," Mara said. Her voice cracked. "Step down and leave the wagon." The man tilted his head slightly, like he was considering it. Then he climbed down, slow and easy, boots hitting the dirt without a sound. He didn't take his eyes off her. "You planning to shoot me?" he asked. "If I have to." "You look like you're about to fall over." "I'm fine." "You're not." Mara's hands were shaking now, the revolver wobbling in her grip. She tried to steady it, but the world tilted sideways and suddenly the ground was rushing up to meet her. She didn't feel the impact. She felt arms catch her, strong and sure, and then she was being lowered gently onto the dirt. The man crouched beside her, his face swimming in and out of focus. "Easy," he said. "When's the last time you ate?" Mara tried to answer, but her throat was too dry. She tried to push him away, but her arms wouldn't cooperate. And then, to her absolute humiliation, she started crying. The man didn't say anything. He just stood, walked back to the wagon, and returned with a canteen. He uncapped it and held it to her lips. "Slow," he said. "You drink too fast, you'll just throw it up." Mara drank. The water was warm and tasted like metal, but it was the best thing she'd ever had. She drank until he pulled it away, and then she slumped back against the dirt, chest heaving. "What's your name?" the man asked. She didn't answer. "Mine's Caleb," he said. "Caleb Rourke." Mara closed her eyes. She didn't want his name. She didn't want his kindness. She wanted to take his wagon and disappear, but she couldn't even stand. "You got somewhere to be?" Caleb asked. "Nowhere," Mara said. "Everywhere. Doesn't matter." "It matters." "Why?" "Because you're still breathing." Mara opened her eyes and looked at him. He was serious. Not mocking, not pitying, just serious, like he actually believed what he was saying. "I was going to rob you," she said. "I know. You should have let me fall." "Probably. So why didn't you?" Caleb shrugged. "Didn't seem right." Mara didn't know what to say to that. In her experience, people didn't do things because they were right. They did things because they had to, because they wanted something, because they were afraid. Caleb didn't look afraid. He looked tired, sure, but not afraid. He stood and offered her a hand. "Come on, let's get you out of the sun." Mara stared at his hand for a long moment. Then, against every instinct she had, she took it. Caleb's wagon was packed with trade goods, bolts of fabric, canned food, tools, medicine. He set Mara up in the shade of the canvas cover and gave her a piece of hardtack and some jerky. She ate slowly, forcing herself not to wolf it down, and tried to figure out what his angle was. "You always pick up people who try to rob you?" she asked. Caleb was checking the horses, running his hands over their legs and flanks. "Not usually," he said. "But you didn't really try all that hard. I had a gun." "You had a gun you weren't going to use," Mara bristled. "You don't know that." Sure I do. Caleb straightened and looked at her. If you were going to shoot me, you would have done it before I got down from the wagon. You wouldn't have given me the chance to talk. Mara hated that he was right. She hated that he'd seen through her that easily. But more than that, she hated how relieved she felt that he had. So what now? She asked. You turn me in? Drop me off at the next town? Do you want me to? I don't care what you do. Then I'll keep heading west, Caleb said. I've got stops to make, places that need supplies. If you want to ride along, you can. Why would you let me do that? Because you need help, Caleb said simply, and I've got space. Mara looked at him for a long time, searching for the trick, the catch, the thing he wasn't saying. But all she saw was a man who meant exactly what he said. I don't have anything to pay you with, she said. Didn't ask you to. I'm not… Mara stopped, swallowed. I'm not what you think I am. Caleb's expression didn't change. I don't think you're anything, he said, except someone who needs a hand. Mara felt something crack open inside her chest, something she'd kept locked down for so long she'd forgotten it was there. She looked away, blinking hard. Okay, she said quietly. Okay. They rode in silence for the first few hours. Caleb didn't press her for conversation, didn't ask questions, didn't try to fill the quiet with empty words. Mara sat in the back of the wagon, watching the desert roll by, and tried to remember the last time someone had helped her without wanting something in return. She couldn't. When the sun started to dip, Caleb pulled the wagon off the trail and set up camp. He built a fire, cooked beans and bacon in a skillet, and handed Mara a plate without ceremony. She ate in silence, her eyes on the flames. You don't talk much, Caleb said eventually. Neither do you. Fair enough. Mara scraped the last of the beans off her plate and set it aside. She knew she should say something, offer some kind of explanation, but the words stuck in her throat. Caleb poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed her one. You don't have to tell me anything, he said, but if you want to, I'll listen. Mara wrapped her hands around the cup, feeling the heat seep into her palms. She stared into the coffee like it might have answers. I had children, she said finally. 2 of them. Caleb didn't say anything, just waited. A boy and a girl, Mara continued. Ben and Lily. Ben was 8, Lily was 6. The past tense hung in the air like smoke. What happened? Caleb asked quietly. Mara's grip tightened on the cup. Their father left when Lily was born. Just walked out one day and never came back. I tried to manage on my own, but it was hard, really hard. I couldn't keep a job, couldn't keep a roof over our heads. We were always one step away from starving. She paused, her throat tightening. And then I got sick, she said. Really sick. I couldn't work at all, couldn't take care of them. I thought if I could just get through the winter, if I could just hold on a little longer, things would get better. But they didn't, Caleb said. Mara shook her head. A man came around, said he ran a ranch a few territories over, said he needed workers, and he'd take the kids, give them food and a place to sleep. I told him no at first, but he kept coming back, and I was so desperate, and the kids were so hungry, and I… Her voice broke. I let him take them, she whispered. I let him take my children. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, You thought you were saving them. I thought I was a coward, Mara said bitterly. I thought I was weak. And I was. I am. You're not. You don't know me. I know you tried to rob me to survive, Caleb said. I know you're still fighting. That's not weakness. Mara looked at him, her vision blurred with tears. I don't even know if they're still alive, she said. It's been over a year. He could have sold them again. They could be anywhere. Do you know his name? Caleb asked. The man who took them? Gaines, Mara said. Horace Gaines. Caleb nodded slowly. I know that name. Mara's heart lurched. You do? Runs a place out near Copper Ridge, Caleb said. Big operation. Brings in drifters and workers from all over. Not exactly known for fair treatment, but he's careful. Stays just this side of the law. Can you… Mara's voice shook. Can you take me there? Caleb looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then he said, I can do better than that. You help me finish my route, and I'll help you get your kids back. Mara stared at him. Why would you do that? Because it's the right thing to do, Caleb said, and because I've got the time. You don't owe me anything. I know. Mara felt something shift inside her, something she couldn't quite name. Hope, maybe, or just the absence of despair. Okay, she said.
This story was posted
Okay.
on the channel west of Betrayal. Please do not repost
Over the next
it
2
in any
weeks,
form.
Mara learned what it meant to ride with Caleb Rourke. He was methodical, efficient, and completely unflappable. He knew every trail, every town, every person worth knowing. He traded fairly, never cheated, and never backed down from a fight if one found him. And he treated Mara like she mattered. It was a strange feeling. She helped him unload supplies, haggle with shopkeepers, and keep the horses fed and watered. In return, he made sure she ate, gave her a bedroll that didn't have holes in it, and never once made her feel like a burden. At night, they sat by the fire and talked. Not about anything heavy, just small things. The weather, the trail ahead, the strange habits of the people they met. Caleb had a dry sense of humor that caught Mara off guard. And more than once, she found herself laughing at something he said. It had been a long time since she'd laughed. One evening, as they camped near a dried-up riverbed, Mara asked the question that had been nagging at her. Why do you do this? She said. The trading, the traveling. You could settle down somewhere, buy land, build something. Caleb stared into the fire, his expression thoughtful. I tried that once, he said. Didn't take. Why not? Because I'm better at moving than staying, Caleb said. Always have been. That's not an answer. Caleb smiled faintly. No, I guess it's not. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, I had a family, wife and a daughter. This was years ago, back in Kansas. We had a farm, a house, the whole thing. I thought I was doing right by them. Mara's chest tightened. What happened? Cholera, Caleb said flatly. Swept through the whole county. Took my wife first, then my daughter a week later. I buried them both on the land we'd worked so hard to build. I'm sorry, Mara said quietly. Caleb shrugged. It was a long time ago, but after that I couldn't stay. Every corner of that place reminded me of what I'd lost, so I sold it, bought a wagon, and started moving. Been moving ever since. Do you regret it? Mara asked. Caleb thought about it. No, he said, but I don't recommend it either. Mara looked at him, this man who had lost everything and kept going anyway, and she felt a strange kinship with him. They were both broken in their own ways, both running from ghosts they couldn't shake. You think we'll find them? She asked. My kids? I do, Caleb said. And when we do, you're going to have to decide what comes next. What do you mean? I mean, getting them back is one thing, Caleb said. But then what? Where do you go? What do you do? Mara hadn't thought that far ahead. She'd been so focused on finding Ben and Lily that she hadn't considered what would happen after. I don't know, she admitted. Well, Caleb said, you've got time to figure it out. But 3 days later, they reached the edge of Copper Ridge. The land here was harsher, more barren, with jagged rocks jutting out of the earth like broken teeth. The ranch itself sat in a shallow valley, surrounded by scrub brush and dust. Mara's heart pounded as they approached. She could see workers moving around the property, carrying supplies, tending to livestock. Somewhere in that place were her children. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop a good distance away and turned to her. We're going to do this smart, he said. No rushing in, no making a scene. We figure out where they are, and then we make a move. Mara nodded, though every instinct in her body screamed to run down there and start tearing the place apart. You stay here, Caleb said. I'll go in and ask around, see what I can find out. No, Mara said. I'm coming with you. Mara, I'm coming with you, she repeated, her voice hard. Caleb looked at her for a long moment, and then he nodded. All right, but you follow my lead. They walked down to the ranch together, and Mara felt the weight of every step. The place was bigger than she'd expected, with multiple buildings and a main house that looked like it had been built by someone with more money than taste. A man came out to meet them, tall, lean, with a face like a hatchet, and eyes that missed nothing. Mara recognized him immediately. Horace Gaines. Help you? Gaines asked, his voice flat. Caleb stepped forward. Looking to do some business, he said. Heard you might need supplies. Gaines looked at the wagon, then at Caleb, then at Mara. His eyes lingered on her for just a moment too long. I know you? He asked. Mara's blood ran cold, but Caleb stepped in smoothly. Don't think so, he said. She's new to the area. Gaines grunted, then turned his attention back to Caleb. What are you selling? As Caleb launched into his pitch, Mara scanned the ranch, her eyes searching desperately for any sign of Ben or Lily. And then she saw them. 2 children working near the barn. A boy and a girl, both thin and dirty, their clothes patched and worn. Her children, Mara's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to scream, to run to them, to grab them, and never let go. But Caleb's hand closed around her wrist, firm and grounding. Easy, he murmured, so quietly that only she could hear. Gaines was still talking, haggling over prices, and Mara forced herself to stand still, to breathe, to wait. And as she watched her children move through the yard, alive and real, and so close she could almost touch them, she made a silent promise. She was getting them back, no matter what it took. Caleb's grip on her wrist was the only thing keeping Mara from running straight across that yard. She could see them so clearly now, Ben's dark hair falling into his eyes as he hauled a bucket of water, Lily's small frame bent under the weight of a basket nearly as big as she was. They looked older, thinner, but alive. Mrs. Rourke here is just along for the ride, Caleb was saying, and it took Mara a second to realize he was talking about her. Keeps the books for me. Make sure I don't get cheated. Gaines barely glanced at her. That's so. Been doing this route for 3 years, Caleb continued, his voice easy and unhurried. Know most of the operations out this way. Yours is new to me, though. Expanded last year, Gaines said. Brought in more workers, more mouths to feed. Well, I've got flour, salt pork, beans, coffee, Caleb said. Fair prices. Better than what you'd get hauling all the way to Prescott. Gaines scratched his jaw, considering. Mara watched Ben set down the bucket and wipe his forehead with his sleeve. He looked tired. They both did. Come up to the house, Gaines said finally. We'll talk numbers. Caleb nodded and released Mara's wrist. Give us a minute to secure the wagon. Gaines grunted and walked back toward the main house without waiting for them. As soon as he was out of earshot, Mara turned to Caleb, her voice shaking. That's them. That's Ben and Lily. I know. We have to be smart, Caleb said, cutting her off. If we spook him, he'll move them, or worse. We do this right, or we don't do it at all. Mara wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. She forced herself to nod. Stay close to me, Caleb said, and don't let him see what you're thinking. They followed Gaines into the house, a sprawling structure that smelled like tobacco and old leather. The main room was cluttered with papers, bottles, and the kind of furniture that looked expensive but felt cold. Gaines poured himself a drink and didn't offer them one. So, he said, settling into a chair. What's your price on flour? Caleb pulled a folded sheet from his pocket and laid it on the table. $2 a sack. Salt pork, $1.50 a pound. Beans, 40 cents. Gaines snorted. That's highway robbery. That's the going rate, Caleb said calmly. You want cheaper, you go to Prescott, but that's a 3-day ride, and you'll burn through half your profit in time and wear. Gaines took a long drink and stared at Caleb like he was trying to decide whether to throw him out or strike a deal. Mara stood by the door, her hands clenched at her sides, willing herself not to look out the window toward the yard. All right, Gaines said finally. I'll take 20 sacks of flour, 15 pounds of pork, and 10 pounds of beans. But I'm paying $1.75 on the flour. $2, Caleb said. $1.80, $1.90, and I'll throw in a pound of coffee. Gaines grinned, sharp and humorless. You drive a hard bargain, Rourke. I'm fair, Caleb said. That's all. They shook on it, and Gaines walked them back outside to supervise the unloading. Mara's heart hammered as they approached the wagon. She could see Ben and Lily still working near the barn, close enough now that she could hear Lily cough. A wet, rattling sound that made Mara's stomach twist. You, Gaines called, gesturing at Ben. Come help unload. Ben looked up, startled, and then jogged over. He was taller than Mara remembered, his arms wiry with muscle that shouldn't have been there yet. He didn't look at her or Caleb, just kept his eyes down as he climbed into the wagon bed. Mara wanted to reach out, to touch him, to say something, but Caleb's hand brushed hers in warning. She stayed silent. Ben hauled sacks of flour down with the kind of efficiency that came from doing it too many times. He worked fast, his face blank, and Mara realized with a jolt that he'd learned how to make himself invisible. Lily appeared a few minutes later, lugging another
This story
basket.
was posted
She
on
set
the
it down
channel
near the
west of
porch and
Betrayal.
glanced toward the
Please
wagon.
do not repost
Her
it
eyes
in any
landed on
form.
Mara for just a second, and Mara's breath caught. Lily didn't recognize her. Of course she didn't. It had been over a year, and Mara looked different now, thinner, harder, burned by the sun and the road. But it still hurt. That all? Gaines asked when the last sack was unloaded. That's it, Caleb said. Gaines pulled a pouch from his belt and counted out bills, slow and deliberate. You come back through in a month, I might have more business for you. I'll keep that in mind, Caleb said, pocketing the money. They climbed back onto the wagon, and Caleb turned the horses toward the trail. Mara didn't look back. She couldn't. They rode in silence until the ranch disappeared behind a ridge. Then Mara let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. They're alive, she said. Yeah. But they're not okay. No, Caleb said. They're not. Mara pressed her hands to her face, trying to steady herself. We have to go back. Tonight. We have to get them out of there. We can't just ride in and take them, Caleb said. Gaines has men. Armed men. If we try to snatch them in the middle of the night, someone's going to get hurt. Maybe them. So what do we do? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, We buy them. Mara stared at him. What? Gaines runs that place like a business, Caleb said. He takes in workers because it's cheap labor. If we offer him enough money, he'll let them go. I don't have money. I do. Mara shook her head. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking, Caleb said. I'm offering. Why? Mara's voice cracked. Why would you do this for me? Caleb glanced at her, his expression unreadable. Because I can, he said, and because those kids deserve better. Mara looked away, her throat tight. She didn't know what to say. Didn't know how to thank someone for something like this. We'll wait a few days, Caleb said. Let Gaines think I'm just another traitor. Then I'll go back and make him an offer. If he takes it, we walk out with your kids. If he doesn't, then we figure out another way. Mara nodded, even though the thought of waiting felt like torture. But Caleb was right. Rushing in would only make things worse. They camped that night near a dry creek bed, and Mara barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ben hauling those sacks, saw Lily coughing, saw the blank look in their eyes. She wondered if they remembered her, wondered if they hated her for what she'd done. Caleb woke her before dawn, his hand on her shoulder. We need to move, he said. Mara sat up, groggy and disoriented. What's wrong? Nothing yet, Caleb said. But we're too close to Gaines's place. If he's got men who patrol, they'll spot us. We need to put some distance between us and them. They broke camp quickly and rode west, deeper into the territory. The landscape here was all rock and scrub, the kind of country that made you feel small. Caleb seemed to know where he was going, though, and Mara didn't question him. By midday, they'd reached a small settlement, barely more than a cluster of buildings and a trading post. Caleb pulled the wagon up to the post and climbed down. Stay here, he said. I'll be back. Mara watched him disappear inside, then leaned back against the wagon and closed her eyes. She was exhausted, her body aching from days of travel and her mind spinning with plans that didn't quite hold together. A voice broke through her thoughts. You new around here? Mara opened her eyes to find a woman standing beside the wagon. She was older, maybe 50, with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. Just passing through, Mara said. The woman studied her for a moment. You look like you've been through hell. Mara almost laughed. Something like that. Word of advice, the woman said. Don't trust anyone out here, especially not the ones who seem friendly. I'll keep that in mind. The woman nodded and walked away, leaving Mara to wonder what that had been about. A few minutes later, Caleb emerged from the trading post carrying a small bundle. Got us some supplies, he said, and some information. What kind of information? Gaines has been busy, Caleb said, climbing onto the wagon. Apparently he's been bringing in more workers every few months. Lots of kids, lots of people who don't have anywhere else to go. Mara's stomach turned. How many? Hard to say, but enough that people are starting to talk. And no one's doing anything about it? Out here, but? Caleb said. Well, law doesn't reach this far, and even if it did, Gaines pays the right people to look the other way. Mara clenched her fists. So he just gets away with it. For now, Caleb said. But that doesn't mean we can't change that. They rode in silence for a while, the sun beating down on them like a hammer. Mara thought about all the other children at that ranch, all the other families torn apart by desperation and greed. It made her sick. What if he won't sell them? She asked quietly. Then we take them anyway, Caleb said. Mara looked at him, surprised. I thought you said that was too dangerous. It is, Caleb said. But if it comes down to it, I'm not leaving those kids there. Mara felt something shift in her chest, something warm and fragile. She didn't know what to call it, but it felt like hope. 3 days later, they circled back toward Copper Ridge. Caleb had a plan, and he'd gone over it with Mara until she could recite it in her sleep. They'd approach in the late afternoon when Gaines would be finishing his day. Caleb would make his offer, $100 for the 2 children, plus another $50 to make it worth Gaines's trouble. It was more money than most people saw in a year, and Caleb was betting that greed would win out. Mara's nerves were shot by the time they reached the ranch. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking, and she kept running through every possible outcome in her head. What if Gaines said no? What if he recognized her? What if something went wrong, and the kids got hurt? Caleb seemed calm, though. He pulled the wagon up to the same spot as before and climbed down, his movements deliberate and unhurried. You ready? He asked. Mara nodded, even though she wasn't. They walked up to the house together, and this time Gaines was waiting for them on the porch. Back already? He said. Got a proposition for you, Caleb said. Gaines raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. Caleb pulled a folded stack of bills from his pocket and held it up. I'm looking to hire a couple of workers. Saw you've got some kids here who could use better placement. Gaines's eyes narrowed. I don't sell my workers. I'm not asking you to sell them, Caleb said smoothly. I'm asking you to release them to my employment. They'll have steady work, fair pay, and a place to sleep. You'll have $150. Seems like a good deal to me. Gaines didn't move. Which kids? The boy and the girl, Caleb said. The ones who were helping with the unloading last time. Gaines stared at him for a long moment, and Mara felt her heart stop. Then he said, Why those 2? They look strong, Caleb said. Capable. I need workers I can rely on. Gaines crossed his arms. And what's she got to do with this? He nodded toward Mara. She's my business partner, Caleb said. Helps me run things. Gaines studied Mara, his eyes sharp. Mara forced herself to meet his gaze, to keep her face blank. I don't think so, Gaines said finally. Mara's stomach dropped. Why not? Caleb asked, his tone still calm. Because I don't trust you, Gaines said. You show up here twice in a week, start asking about my workers, waving money around. That's not normal. I'm offering you a fair deal, Caleb said, and I'm telling you no. Caleb didn't move, didn't react. He just stood there, holding the money, his expression unreadable. Then he said, $200. Gaines blinked. What? $200, Caleb said. Right now. You release those kids to me and I walk away. No questions, no trouble. Gaines's jaw worked. Mara could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. The money versus the risk, the profit versus the suspicion. $250, Gaines said. $200, Caleb repeated. That's my offer. Take it or leave it. The silence stretched out, thick and tense. Mara could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Finally, Gaines said, Show me the money. Caleb counted out the bills, slow and deliberate, and laid them on the porch railing. Gaines picked them up, flipped through them, and then shoved them into his pocket. All right, he said, but they leave now, and if I find out you're running some kind of game, I'll come looking for you. Fair enough, Caleb said. Gaines turned and shouted toward the yard. Ben, Lily, get over here! Get over! Mara's breath caught. She watched as Ben and Lily appeared from around the side of the barn, walking slowly toward the porch. They looked confused, wary. You're leaving, Gaines said when they reached him. This man's taking you on as workers. Do what he says, don't cause trouble, and maybe you'll make something of yourselves. Ben's eyes flicked to Caleb, then to Mara. There was no recognition there, just caution. Go on, Gaines said. Get your things. We don't have things, Ben said quietly. Gaines shrugged. Then get in the wagon. Ben hesitated, and Lily grabbed
This
his
story
hand.
was
They
posted
stood
on the
there for a
channel
moment,
west of
two
Betrayal.
scared kids
Please
staring
do
at
not
a pair of
repost it
strangers,
in any
and Mara
form.
wanted to scream. Instead, she stepped forward and said, "Come on, it's all right." Lily looked up at her, those big eyes searching Mara's face for something to trust. And then, slowly, she nodded. They walked to the wagon together, Ben and Lily climbing into the back, while Mara and Caleb climbed onto the seat. Caleb picked up the reins and turned the horses toward the trail. Gaines watched them go, his arms crossed, and Mara didn't breathe until they were out of sight. The silence in the wagon was deafening. Mara wanted to turn around, to look at her children, to tell them who she was. But she didn't know how. Didn't know if they'd believe her. Didn't know if they'd want to. Caleb drove them a good 5 miles before pulling off the trail and stopping near a cluster of rocks. He set the brake and climbed down, and Mara followed. Ben and Lily stayed in the wagon, watching them with wide, uncertain eyes. "It's okay," Caleb said gently. "You're safe now." "Safe from what?" Ben asked, his voice flat. Mara's throat closed up. She stepped closer to the wagon, her hands trembling. "Ben," she said. "Lily, it's me." Ben frowned. Lily tilted her head. "I'm your mother," Mara said, her voice breaking. Ben's expression didn't change. "No, you're not." The words hit Mara like a punch to the gut. "Yes, I am. I know I look different, but it's me. It's really me." Lily's eyes widened. "Mama?" Mara nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, baby. It's Mama." Lily scrambled out of the wagon and threw herself into Mara's arms, sobbing. Mara caught her and held on tight, burying her face in Lily's hair. Ben stayed where he was, his face hard. "You left us." "I know," Mara said, her voice shaking. "I know, and I'm so sorry. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought he'd take care of you." "He didn't," Ben said. "He worked us like animals. We barely got enough to eat. Lily's been sick for weeks." Mara pulled back and looked at Lily, whose face was pale and drawn. "We'll get you to a doctor," she said. "I promise." "Why should we believe you?" Ben asked. His voice was cold, but Mara could hear the hurt underneath it. "Because I'm here," Mara said. "Because I came back for you, and I'm never leaving you again." Ben stared at her for a long time. Then he climbed down from the wagon and stood in front of her, his arms crossed. "Prove it," he said. Mara didn't know how to do that. She didn't know how to make up for the year they'd lost, the pain they'd endured. But she reached out and took his hand, and when he didn't pull away, she knew it was a start. That night they camped under the stars, and Mara sat with her children close beside her. Lily fell asleep with her head in Mara's lap, and Ben sat a few feet away, staring into the fire. Caleb gave them space, tending to the horses and checking the supplies. But later, when the kids were both asleep, he came and sat beside Mara. "You did good," he said quietly. "I don't know about that," Mara said. "They're here. They're safe. That's what matters." Mara looked down at Lily, her small face peaceful in sleep. "She's sick." "We'll find a doctor," Caleb said. "There's a town about 2 days west. They've got someone who can help." "And then what?" Mara asked. "Where do we go?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I've been thinking about that." "And?" "There's a place," he said, "out near the Mogollon Rim. Used to be a homestead, but the family moved on. It's been sitting empty for a couple years now. If we fix it up, it could be livable." Mara looked at him, surprised. "You want to settle down?" "I'm thinking about it," Caleb said. "And I'm thinking you and the kids could use a place to call home." Mara's chest tightened. "Caleb, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking," he said. "I'm offering, same as before." Mara didn't know what to say. The idea of a home, a real home, felt impossible. But sitting here, with her children sleeping beside her and Caleb steady and solid in the firelight, it almost felt real. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay." They reached the town 2 days later, a dusty little place called Redemption. The doctor there was an older man with kind eyes and steady hands. He examined Lily and confirmed what Mara had feared. She had a lung infection, likely from breathing in too much dust and working too hard. He gave them medicine and strict instructions for rest and care. "She'll pull through," he said, "but she needs time and she needs to stay out of the heat." Mara thanked him and paid with the last of the money she had. It wasn't much, but it was worth it. They stayed in Redemption for 3 days while Lily recovered. Ben warmed up to Mara slowly, asking questions about where she'd been, what she'd been doing. Mara answered as honestly as she could, leaving out the worst parts but not hiding the truth. "I'm sorry I wasn't stronger," she said one evening. "I should have found another way." "You're here now," Ben said. "That's what counts." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was something. On the 4th day, they set out for the homestead. The land here was different, greener, cooler, with pine trees dotting the hills. Mara felt something loosen in her chest as they climbed higher, the desert falling away behind them. The homestead was exactly as Caleb had described it, small, run down, but solid. The roof had holes, the windows were broken, and the door hung crooked on its hinges. But the bones of it were good. "We can fix this," Caleb said. Mara looked at the house, at the land stretching out around it, and she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. They spent the first night in the wagon because the house wasn't safe to sleep in. The roof sagged in the middle, and when Caleb pushed on one of the support beams, it cracked under his hand. The whole place smelled like rot and mouse droppings, and Mara could hear something scurrying in the walls. "It's worse than I thought," Caleb admitted, standing in what used to be the main room. "Can we fix it?" Mara asked. He looked up at the ceiling, then at the walls, then at the floor. "Yeah," he said, "but it's going to take time." Ben was outside, kicking at rocks and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Lily sat on the porch step, wrapped in a blanket, her cough still rattling in her chest. Mara watched them through the broken window and felt the weight of what they were trying to do settle on her shoulders. "Maybe this was a bad idea," she said quietly. Caleb turned to look at her. "You want to go somewhere else?" "I don't know where else we'd go." "Then we stay," Caleb said, "and we make it work." Mara nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed him. But Caleb had a way of making impossible things seem possible, and she was too tired to argue. They started work the next morning. Caleb climbed onto the roof and began tearing off the damaged shingles while Mara sorted through the debris inside, separating what could be salvaged from what needed to be burned. Ben helped without being asked, dragging broken furniture out into the yard and stacking it in a pile. Lily watched from the wagon, too weak to do much else. The work was brutal. Mara's hands were blistered by the end of the first day, her back aching from hauling water and scrubbing floors. Caleb worked like a machine, methodical and relentless, only stopping when the light faded too much to see. That night, they ate beans and cornbread by the fire, too exhausted to talk. Ben fell asleep sitting up, his head nodding forward, and Mara had to shake him awake to get him to his bedroll. Lily was already out cold, curled up under every blanket they had. Mara sat by the fire long after everyone else was asleep, staring into the flames. She thought about Gaines, about the ranch, about all the things that could have gone wrong. They'd gotten lucky. She knew that. But luck didn't build houses or fill stomachs, and she didn't know how long theirs would hold. "You should sleep," Caleb said, and Mara jumped. She hadn't heard him approach. "I will," she said. He sat down beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "You did good today." "I hauled trash and scrubbed dirt," Mara said. "That's not much." "It's more than nothing." Mara looked at him, at the firelight playing across his face, and she felt something shift in her chest. "Why are you doing this, Caleb? Really?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Because I couldn't save my family, but maybe I can help save yours." The words hit Mara hard, and she didn't know how to respond, so she just nodded and looked back at the fire. "Get some sleep," Caleb said again, standing. "Tomorrow's going to be just as hard." He was right. The next day was worse. The roof was only half finished, and it started raining in the afternoon, a cold, driving rain that turned the ground to mud and soaked through their clothes. They worked through it anyway because stopping meant losing progress, and they couldn't afford that. Ben slipped in the mud and cut his hand on a piece of broken glass. Mara wrapped it in a strip of cloth torn from her own shirt and told him to keep working. He did, without complaint, and Mara felt a surge of pride mixed with guilt. He was too young to be this tough. Lily's cough got worse. Mara could hear it even over the sound of the rain, a deep, wet hack that made her chest tighten with fear. The medicine from Redemption was helping, but not fast enough. "She needs to be inside," Mara said to Caleb that evening. They were standing under the partial roof, rain dripping through the gaps above them.
This
The house
story
isn't
was
ready,
posted on the
Caleb
channel
said.
west of
I don't care.
Betrayal.
She can't
Please
stay
do
in
not
the wagon
repost it
anymore.
in any form.
Caleb looked at her, then nodded. All right, we'll clear out one of the back rooms. Make it livable. They worked by lamplight, sweeping out debris and patching the worst of the holes in the walls with scraps of wood and old canvas. It wasn't much, but it was better than the wagon. Mara made a bed out of blankets and hay, and they carried Lily inside. She looked so small in that big empty room. Mara sat beside her, brushing the hair out of her face, and tried not to think about how fragile she was. Is this our house now? Lily asked, her voice hoarse. It will be, Mara said. It doesn't look like a house. Not yet, but it will. Lily closed her eyes, and Mara stayed with her until she fell asleep. When she finally stepped outside, she found Caleb sitting on the porch, soaked to the bone and staring out at the rain. You should get dry, Mara said. So should you. Mara sat down beside him, too tired to care about the wet. Thank you, she said, for all of this. Caleb didn't answer right away. Then he said, You don't have to keep thanking me. I do, though. You didn't have to help us. You didn't owe us anything. Maybe not, Caleb said, but I wanted to. Mara looked at him, and for the first time she let herself really see him. Not just the man who'd saved her, but the man who'd stayed. The man who'd given up his route, his freedom, his whole way of life to build something with her. I don't know how to do this, she said quietly. Do what? Any of it. Be a mother. Build a home. Trust someone. Caleb turned to look at her, his eyes steady. You're already doing it, he said. You just don't see it yet. The rain kept falling, and they sat there together, two broken people trying to piece themselves back into something whole. By the end of the first week, they'd made real progress. The roof was finished, the walls were patched, and they'd cleared out enough debris to make the main room usable. Caleb built a makeshift stove out of stones and scrap metal, and Mara cooked their first meal inside the house, a thin stew made from dried meat and whatever vegetables they could scavenge. It wasn't much, but it felt like a victory. Ben started to come around. He still didn't talk much, but he worked hard, and Mara caught him smiling once or twice when he thought no one was looking. Lily's cough was getting better, and she had enough energy to sit up and play with a doll Caleb had carved for her out of a piece of wood. Things were starting to feel almost normal. And then the riders came. Mara saw them first, 3 men on horseback cresting the ridge to the east. She was outside, hanging laundry on a line Caleb had strung between 2 trees, and she froze when she spotted them. Caleb, she called, her voice tight. He came out of the house, saw the riders, and his expression hardened. Get the kids inside, he said. Mara didn't argue. She grabbed Lily and called for Ben, who was hauling water from the creek. They all went inside, and Caleb shut the door behind them. Stay here, he said. Don't come out unless I tell you to. Who are they? Mara asked. Don't know yet, Caleb said. But I'm going to find out. He stepped back outside, and Mara moved to the window, peering through a gap in the boards. The riders had stopped about 50 yards from the house, and one of them was dismounting. Mara's stomach dropped when she recognized him. Horace Gaines. He walked toward the house with the kind of confidence that came from knowing he had backup. Caleb stood on the porch, his hand resting on his belt near where his revolver hung. Rourke, Gaines said, his voice carrying across the yard. Didn't expect to find you out here. Didn't expect you to come looking, Caleb said. Gaines stopped a few feet from the porch, his eyes flicking toward the house. Funny thing. I was going through my books, and I realized I never got your full name, or a receipt for that transaction we made. You got your money, Caleb said. That's all you need. See, that's where you're wrong, Gaines said. Because those kids you took? Turns out they're worth more than I thought. Mara's blood ran cold. She glanced at Ben and Lily, who were huddled together in the corner, their faces pale. They're not for sale, Caleb said. Everything's for sale, Gaines said. You just have to name the right price. I already paid you. And now I'm saying it wasn't enough. Gaines's smile was sharp and humorless. Give me the kids, and we'll call it even. Otherwise, I'm going to have to take them. Caleb didn't move. You're not taking anyone. Gaines's smile faded. You sure about that? I'm sure. The tension in the air was so thick Mara could barely breathe. She saw Gaines's hand drift toward his gun, and she knew what was about to happen. "Caleb," she whispered, even though he couldn't hear her. But Caleb was already moving. His hand went to his revolver, and he drew it in one smooth motion, leveling it at Gaines. "You take one more step," Caleb said, his voice cold, "and I'll put a bullet in you." Gaines stopped. His hand was on his gun, but he hadn't drawn it yet. The two men on horseback behind him shifted, their hands moving to their own weapons. "You're outnumbered," Gaines said. "Maybe," Caleb said, "but you'll be dead before your boys get a shot off. You willing to bet on that?" Gaines stared at him, and Mara could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Finally, he took a step back, his hand dropping away from his gun. "This isn't over," he said. "Yeah, it is," Caleb said. "You come back here and I'll kill you. That's a promise." Gaines's jaw tightened, but he turned and walked back to his horse. He mounted up, and the three of them rode off, disappearing over the ridge. Caleb stood there for a long time, his gun still in his hand, watching the horizon. Then he holstered it and came back inside. Mara was shaking. "He's going to come back." "Probably," Caleb said. "So what do we do?" "We make sure we're ready," Caleb said, "and we don't let them catch us off guard." Ben stood up, his fists clenched. "I'm not going back there." "You're not," Caleb said firmly. "I won't let that happen." Lily started crying, and Mara pulled her close, whispering reassurances she wasn't sure she believed. That night, Caleb slept with his rifle beside him, and Mara didn't sleep at all. She sat by the window, watching the darkness, waiting for shadows that never came. The next few days were tense. Caleb set up traps around the property, tripwires, noisemakers, anything that would give them warning if someone approached. He taught Ben how to shoot, setting up targets and drilling him until his hands stopped shaking. Mara hated it, hated seeing her son holding a gun, but she knew it was necessary. Lily stayed inside, her cough finally starting to ease. Mara read to her from an old book Caleb had found in the wreckage of the house, and Lily listened with wide eyes, her small hand clutching Mara's. "Mama," she said one evening, "are we safe here?" Mara wanted to lie, to tell her that everything was fine, but she couldn't. "I don't know, baby," she said, "but we're going to try to be." Lily nodded, and Mara kissed her forehead, her heart aching. A week passed, and Gaines didn't come back. Then 2 weeks. Mara started to let herself hope that maybe he'd given up, that maybe Caleb's threat had been enough. But hope was a dangerous thing. It was late afternoon when they heard the horses. Mara was inside, cooking dinner, when Caleb burst through the door. "They're coming," he said. "Get the kids to the cellar." Mara didn't ask questions. She grabbed Ben and Lily and pulled them toward the trapdoor Caleb had reinforced in the floor. She shoved them down into the darkness and climbed in after them, pulling the door shut above her. The cellar was small and damp, smelling of earth and mildew. Mara held her children close, one hand over Lily's mouth to muffle her breathing. Above them she heard footsteps, voices, the sound of the door being kicked open. "Search the place," Gaines's voice said. Mara's heart hammered in her chest. She could hear them moving through the house, tearing things apart, looking for them. And then she heard Caleb's voice, calm and steady. "They're not here." "Liar," Gaines spat. "I sent them away," Caleb said, "soon as I saw you coming." "Where?" "Doesn't matter. You're not getting them." There was a pause, and then Mara heard the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. "Last chance, Rourke," Gaines said. "Tell me where they are, or I'll put a bullet in you and burn this place to the ground." Mara's breath caught. She wanted to scream, to run up there and stop this, but she couldn't move. She could only listen. "Go ahead," Caleb said, "but you're not getting those kids." There was a long, terrible silence, and then Mara heard a voice she didn't recognize. "Boss, we got company." Mara heard the sound of horses more than before, and then a new voice, rough and commanding. "That's far enough, Gaines." Mara didn't know who it was, but the tension in the air shifted. She heard Gaines curse under his breath. "This doesn't concern you, Marshal," Gaines said. "Marshal." Mara's heart leapt. "I got a complaint filed against you," the marshal said. "Something about you trafficking workers. Thought I'd come out and take a look." "Those are lies," Gaines said. "Maybe. Maybe not. But I think you should come with me. We can sort it out in town." There was a pause, and then Gaines said, "Fine, but this isn't over." Mara heard the sound of boots on the porch, then horses riding away. She stayed in the cellar, holding her children, not daring to move.
This story was posted
Finally,
on the channel
trapdoor
west
opened,
of
and
Betrayal.
Caleb's face appeared
Please
above
do not
her.
repost it in
"It's
any
okay,"
form.
he said. "They're gone." Mara climbed out, her legs shaking, and found herself face to face with a man in a dusty coat and a badge pinned to his chest. He was older, maybe 60, with a weathered face and sharp eyes. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. "Marshal Hendricks. I'm sorry for the trouble." Mara nodded, unable to speak. "Who filed the complaint?" Caleb asked. Hendricks glanced at him. "Anonymous, but it was detailed. Whoever sent it knew what they were talking about." Mara thought of the woman at the trading post, the one who'd warned her not to trust anyone. Maybe she'd been wrong. "Gaines going to face charges?" Caleb asked. "If I can make them stick," Hendricks said. "But men like him have a way of slipping through the cracks. Best thing you can do is keep your heads down and stay out of his way." "We're not going anywhere," Caleb said. Hendricks studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but if he comes back, you send word to me. Don't try to handle it yourself." "I'll keep that in mind," Caleb said. Hendricks tipped his hat again and left, his men following behind him. Mara watched them go, her heart still pounding. "That was too close," she said. "Yeah," Caleb said, "but we're still here." Mara looked at him, at the man who'd stood between her children and danger without hesitation, and she felt something crack open inside her. "Thank you," she said. "You don't have to—" "Yes, I do," Mara said. She stepped closer to him, her voice shaking. "You could have told him where we were. You could have saved yourself, but you didn't." Caleb looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I wasn't going to let him take them." "I know," Mara said. And then, before she could stop herself, she kissed him. It was brief, just a press of her lips against his, but it said everything she couldn't put into words. When she pulled back, Caleb was staring at her, his eyes wide. "Mara, don't," she said. "Just don't say anything." Caleb nodded slowly, and they stood there in the fading light, two people who'd been broken by the world and were somehow still standing. The next few weeks were quieter. Gaines didn't come back, and word filtered through the territory that he was being investigated by the marshal's office. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep him away. Mara and Caleb worked on the house every day, and slowly it started to feel like a home. They built furniture, patched the last of the holes in the walls, and even planted a small garden near the creek. Ben helped without being asked, and Lily grew stronger, her laughter filling the house in a way that made Mara's chest ache. One evening, as they sat around the table eating dinner, Lily looked up at Caleb and said, "Are you going to stay with us?" Caleb glanced at Mara, then back at Lily. "If you want me to." "I want you to," Lily said. Ben nodded. "Me too." Mara felt tears prick her eyes, and she reached across the table to take Caleb's hand. He squeezed it gently, and she knew, in that moment, that they were going to be okay. Not perfect, not easy, but okay. And that was enough. The winter came early that year, sweeping down from the mountains with a cold that bit through every layer of clothing they had. Mara woke one morning to find frost on the inside of the windows and Ben's breath visible in the air as he slept. The house was warmer than the wagon had been, but not by much. Caleb was already awake, feeding wood into the stove he'd built. The fire crackled and hissed, throwing shadows across the walls. "We need more firewood," he said without looking up. Mara wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and moved closer to the warmth. "How much more?" "A lot more. This cold's going to last through February at least." "I'll help you cut it." Caleb glanced at her. "You sure?" "I'm sure." They spent the next 3 days in the woods, felling dead trees and hauling them back to the house. It was brutal work. Mara's hands were raw and bleeding by the end of the first day, and her shoulders screamed every time she swung the axe. But she didn't stop. Neither did Caleb. They worked in a rhythm that didn't require words, each of them knowing what needed to be done and doing it. Ben helped stack the wood, building neat rows along the side of the house. Lily stayed inside, keeping the fire going and watching through the window. Mara caught her waving once and waved back, and the sight of her daughter's smile made the pain in her hands worth it. On the fourth day, the first real snow came. It started as a few lazy flakes in the afternoon and turned into a full storm by evening. By morning, the world was buried under 2 feet of white, and the temperature had dropped so low that the water in the basin froze solid. They huddled inside, burning through firewood faster than Mara wanted to admit. Caleb rationed their food carefully, stretching what little they had left. The supplies from his last trading run were almost gone, and there was no way to get more until the snow cleared. "How long can we make it?" Mara asked one night after the kids were asleep. Caleb was sharpening his knife, the blade scraping against the whetstone in slow, deliberate strokes. 2 weeks? Maybe 3 if we're careful. And if the snow doesn't clear by then? Then we'll figure something out. Mara wanted to press him, to demand a better answer, but she knew he didn't have one. So she sat beside him and watched the fire, trying not to think about what would happen if they ran out of food. The days blurred together. They ate less and less, giving most of what they had to Ben and Lily. Mara's stomach ached constantly, a hollow, gnawing pain that never went away. She caught Caleb slipping his portion to the kids more than once and wanted to yell at him for it, but she was doing the same thing. Lily's cough came back, worse than before. Mara dosed her with the last of the medicine from Redemption, but it didn't help much. At night, Mara lay awake listening to her daughter struggle for breath, and she felt the fear creeping back in, cold and suffocating. "She needs a doctor," Mara said to Caleb one morning. "I know." "So what do we do?" Caleb looked out the window at the snow, which showed no signs of letting up. "We wait. Soon as there's a break, I'll ride to Redemption and get more medicine." "That's a 2-day ride in good weather," Mara said. "And this? It could take a week." "Then it takes a week. And what if something happens to you?" Caleb turned to look at her, his expression steady. "It won't." Mara wanted to believe him, but she'd learned a long time ago that wanting something didn't make it true. The storm finally broke 3 days later. The snow stopped falling, and the sky cleared to a bright, cold blue. Caleb saddled one of the horses and packed what little food they could spare. "I'll be back as soon as I can," he said. Mara nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She watched him ride off into the snow, his figure getting smaller and smaller until he disappeared over the ridge. Then she went back inside and tried to figure out how to keep her children alive until he came back. The first day was hard. The second was worse. Lily's cough turned into a fever, and she stopped eating entirely. Mara sat with her through the night, bathing her forehead with cold water and whispering things she didn't even remember saying. Ben tried to help, but there wasn't much he could do. He kept the fire going and melted snow for water, and when Mara finally broke down and cried, he sat beside her and didn't say anything. "I'm scared," Mara admitted. "Me too," Ben said. On the 3rd day, Lily's fever broke. She opened her eyes and asked for water, and Mara nearly sobbed with relief. She gave her small sips, careful not to let her drink too fast, and held her hand until she fell back asleep. "Is she going to be okay?" Ben asked. "I think so," Mara said. "I hope so." Caleb came back on the 4th day, his face wind-burned and his horse half dead from exhaustion. He had medicine, food, and a letter from Marshal Hendricks. "What's this?" Mara asked, taking the envelope. "Hendricks wanted you to have it," Caleb said. "Said it's important." Mara opened the letter and read it slowly. Her hand started shaking halfway through. "What is it?" Ben asked. "Gaines is gone," Mara said. "Hendricks arrested him. He's being held in Prescott, waiting for trial." Caleb looked up from where he was unpacking the supplies. "That's good news?" "There's more," Mara said. "Hendricks found other children at the ranch, 16 of them. They're being placed with families in the territory." Ben's eyes widened. "He's really gone?" "Yeah," Mara said. "He's really gone." The relief that washed over her was so intense it made her dizzy. She sat down hard on the nearest chair and pressed her hands to her face. "We're safe," she said. "We're actually safe." Caleb crossed the room and knelt in front of her. "You're safe," he said. "And you're staying that way." Mara looked at him, this man who'd given up everything to help her, and she felt something shift inside her chest. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. It was something deeper, something that scared her almost as much as Gaines had. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You've already thanked me." "I know, but I mean it." Caleb smiled, small and almost shy, and Mara realized she'd never seen him smile like that before. That night, they ate a real meal for the first time in weeks. Caleb had brought back beans, salt pork, flour, and even a little sugar. Mara made biscuits and gravy, and the smell of it filled the house like a promise. Lily ate a full plate and asked for seconds. Ben ate so much he had to lie down afterward, groaning about how full he was. and Mara sat at the table with Caleb, drinking coffee and feeling something she hadn't felt in so long she'd almost forgotten
This story
what it
was posted on the channel
Peace.
west of
The weeks
Betrayal.
that followed were
Please do
easier.
not repost
The snow
it in
started
any
to
form.
melt and the days grew longer. Mara and Caleb finished the last of the repairs on the house, and it finally started to feel like more than just shelter. It felt like a home. Ben built a chicken coop out of scrap wood, and Caleb brought back 6 hens from Redemption. They laid eggs every morning, and Mara couldn't remember the last time she'd had fresh eggs. Lily named each of the chickens and spent hours talking to them, and Mara didn't have the heart to tell her they'd eventually end up in the stew pot. One afternoon, Mara was hanging laundry when she saw a wagon coming up the trail. She froze, her hand going instinctively to the knife she now kept tucked in her belt. But it wasn't Gaines, it was Marshall Hendricks. He pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down, tipping his hat. "Mrs. Vale." "Marshall," Mara said, relaxing slightly. "What brings you out here?" "Wanted to check in," Hendricks said. "Make sure you folks were doing all right." Caleb came out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "Marshall?" "Rourke." Hendricks looked around the property, taking in the repaired house, the chicken coop, the neatly stacked firewood. "You've done well here." "We're managing," Caleb said. Hendricks nodded. "I also wanted to let you know, Gaines went to trial last week. Judge threw the book at him. He's going to prison for a long time." Mara felt her knees go weak. "It's really over?" "It's really over," Hendricks said. She sat down on the porch step, her hands shaking. Ben came running from the creek, and Lily followed behind him, and Mara pulled them both close. "Did you hear that?" she said. "He's gone. He can't hurt you anymore." Ben nodded, his face serious. Lily just clung to Mara's neck and didn't let go. Hendricks cleared his throat. "There's one more thing. The children we found at Gaines's ranch, most of them have been placed, but there's a couple who don't have anywhere to go. Good kids, strong. I was wondering if you might have room for them." Mara looked at Caleb, who raised an eyebrow. "We're barely managing as it is," Mara said. "I understand," Hendricks said. "But I thought I'd ask. These kids, they've been through hell. They need a place where someone will look out for them." Mara thought about Ben and Lily, about how close they'd come to losing everything. And she thought about all the other children out there who hadn't been as lucky. "How old are they?" she asked. "Boys about 12, girls maybe 10. Mara looked at Caleb again. He was watching her, his expression unreadable. "What do you think?" she asked. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think we've got room." Mara felt her throat tighten. "Yeah," she said, "we do." Hendricks smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "I'll bring them by next week." He left, and Mara sat on the porch with Caleb, watching the sun set over the mountains. "You sure about this?" she asked. "No," Caleb said, "but I think it's the right thing to do." Mara nodded. "Me too." The children arrived the following Tuesday. The boy's name was Samuel, and the girl was called Ruth. They were thin and wary, with eyes that had seen too much. Mara recognized that look. She'd seen it in the mirror often enough. "This is your home now," she told them. "You're safe here." Samuel nodded but didn't say anything. Ruth just stared at the ground. It took time for them to settle in. Samuel was quiet and kept to himself, doing his chores without complaint but never quite relaxing. Ruth followed Lily everywhere, and Mara realized the girl was terrified of being alone. Ben took Samuel under his wing, teaching him how to chop wood and care for the horses. Lily shared her dolls with Ruth and told her stories at night. And slowly, bit by bit, the two new children started to come back to life. One evening, Mara found Samuel sitting on the porch, staring out at the horizon. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. Then, after a pause, "Thank you for taking us in." "You don't have to thank me," Mara said. "I do, though. Most people wouldn't." Mara sat down beside him. "I know what it's like," she said, "to feel like you don't have anywhere to go, like nobody wants you." Samuel looked at her surprised. "I'm not saying it's going to be easy," Mara continued, "but you've got a place here, for as long as you need it." Samuel nodded, and Mara thought she saw the ghost of a smile on his face. Spring came slowly that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought new life with it. The garden started to bloom, and the creek ran high with snowmelt. Caleb built a fence around the property, and Mara planted flowers near the porch, something she'd never had time for before. The children thrived. Ben grew taller and stronger, his confidence building with every passing day. Lily's laugh rang out across the yard, bright and clear. Samuel started to relax and Ruth began to talk more, her voice soft but steady. And Mara started to feel like herself again. Not the woman she'd been before. That person was gone, buried under too much pain and loss. But someone new. Someone stronger. One night, after the children were asleep, Caleb found Mara sitting on the porch, looking up at the stars. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. "Not at all." He sat down beside her, and they were quiet for a while, just listening to the sounds of the night. "I've been thinking," Caleb said finally. "About what?" "About the future. About what we're doing here." Mara looked at him. And I think we should make it official," Caleb said. "The homestead. File the claim, put it in both our names." Mara's heart skipped. "Both our names?" "Yeah," Caleb said. "I mean, if you want to. I know things between us are complicated, but we're building something here, and I think it should belong to both of us." Mara felt tears prick her eyes. "I'd like that." Caleb smiled. "Good." They sat there for a while longer, and then Mara said, "There's something else we should talk about." "What's that?" "The kids. Ben and Lily? Legally, they're still—" She hesitated. "They're still mine. But if something happened to me, they'd have nobody." Caleb turned to look at her. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want you to adopt them," Mara said. "Make it legal. Make it real, so they'll always have someone." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You sure about that?" "I'm sure." "All right," Caleb said. "Then we'll do it." Mara reached out and took his hand, and he squeezed it gently. They sat there under the stars, two people who'd been broken by the world and had somehow found a way to put each other back together. The next morning, Caleb rode to the territorial office in Prescott. He was gone for 3 days, and when he came back, he had a stack of papers with him. "It's official," he said, handing them to Mara. "The homestead's in both our names, and I filed the adoption papers for Ben and Lily." Mara looked down at the documents, her vision blurring with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't have to keep thanking me. I know. But I want to." That night, they gathered the children together and told them the news. Ben looked stunned, and Lily threw her arms around Caleb's neck and didn't let go. "Does this mean you're our father now?" Lily asked. Caleb looked at Mara, and she nodded. "Yeah," he said. "I guess it does." Ben stepped forward and held out his hand. Caleb shook it, and then Ben pulled him into a hug. Mara watched them, her heart so full it ached. Samuel and Ruth stood off to the side, watching quietly. Mara caught Ruth's eye and smiled. "You're part of this too," she said. "All of you. This is your family now." Ruth nodded, and Samuel's shoulders relaxed just a little. The summer was good to them. The garden produced more than they expected, and Caleb sold the surplus in town for a decent profit. They bought more chickens, a milk cow, and even a few pigs. The house felt alive in a way it never had before, filled with noise and laughter, and the kind of chaos that came from having 4 children under one roof. Mara learned how to skin vegetables, and she filled shelf after shelf with jars of tomatoes, beans, and pickles. Caleb built a smokehouse, and they cured meat for the winter. Ben and Samuel worked side by side, and Ruth and Lily became inseparable. One afternoon, Mara was in the garden when she heard hoofbeats. She looked up to see a rider approaching, and her stomach clenched with old fear. But it was just a neighbor, a man named Garrett, who lived a few miles to the west. "Afternoon, Mrs. Rourke," he said, tipping his hat. Mara blinked. She'd almost forgotten that was her name now. "Afternoon. Wanted to let you know there's a barn raising next week over at the Miller place. Everyone's invited. Thought you and your family might want to come." "We'll be there so—" Mara said. Garrett nodded and rode off, and Mara stood there for a moment, turning the invitation over in her mind. A barn raising, a community event, the kind of thing normal families did. She went inside and told Caleb about it. "You want to go?" he asked. "I think we should," Mara said. "It'd be good for the kids. Good for us." Caleb nodded. "All right, we'll go." The day of the barn raising was hot and clear. They loaded the wagon with food Mara had prepared and drove to the Miller place, which was already bustling with people. Men were hauling lumber and pounding nails, while women set up tables and laid out food. Children ran everywhere, their shouts and
This
laughter
story was
filling the
posted
air.
on the channel west
Mara
of
felt out of
Betrayal.
place at first.
Please do not
awkward and
repost
uncertain.
it in any form.
But then a woman approached her, smiling. "You must be Mrs. Rourke," she said. "I'm Ellen Garrett. My husband mentioned you'd be coming. Please call me Mara." "Mara then. Come on. Let me introduce you to some folks." Ellen led her around, making introductions, and Mara found herself slowly relaxing. These were good people, hardworking and kind, and they welcomed her without question. Caleb worked alongside the other men, fitting beams and raising walls. Mara watched him from across the yard, and she realized how much he'd changed. He smiled more now, laughed more. He looked lighter, like some of the weight he'd been carrying had finally lifted. Ben and Samuel joined the other boys, and Lily and Ruth played with a group of girls near the creek. Mara stood there, watching her family integrate into this community, and she felt something she hadn't felt in years: belonging. By evening, the barn was up, and the whole community gathered for a meal. There was music and dancing, and Mara found herself pulled onto the makeshift dance floor by Caleb. "I don't know how to dance," she protested. "Neither do I," Caleb said, "but I don't think anyone cares." He was right. They stumbled through a clumsy waltz, stepping on each other's feet and laughing, and Mara couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this light. As the sun set and the music slowed, Caleb pulled her close. "This is good," he said quietly. "Yeah," Mara said, "it is." They swayed together under the stars, surrounded by people who'd become their neighbors, their friends, their community. And Mara realized that this messy, imperfect, beautiful life was everything she'd ever wanted. When they finally headed home that night, the children asleep in the back of the wagon, Mara leaned against Caleb's shoulder and closed her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For everything. For saving me. For giving me a home. For giving my children a father." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You saved yourself, Mara. I just helped." Mara smiled. "Maybe, but I couldn't have done it without you." "We couldn't have done it without each other," Caleb said. "That's how this works." Mara nodded, and they rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, the stars bright above them, and the future stretching out ahead like an open road. The harvest that fall was better than anyone expected. The garden yielded bushels of squash, beans, and potatoes, and the corn stood tall and golden in the field Caleb had plowed behind the house. Mara spent long days preserving everything they couldn't eat fresh, her hands stained purple from beets, and her kitchen smelling like vinegar and spices. The children worked alongside them without complaint. Ben had grown into the kind of young man who could handle a full day's labor without breaking, and Samuel wasn't far behind. Lily and Ruth picked vegetables and helped with the canning, their chatter filling the house with warmth. It was the kind of life Mara had never imagined she'd have. Not perfect, nothing ever was, but solid, real, built on work and trust and the slow accumulation of ordinary days. One afternoon in late September, Caleb came back from town with news. "Marshall Hendricks is retiring," he said, unpacking supplies from the wagon. "Moving back east to be with his daughter." Mara looked up from where she was mending one of Ben's shirts. "Who's replacing him?" "Don't know yet, but he wanted me to tell you something." Caleb pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "This came through the territorial office. It's about Gaines." Mara's stomach tightened. "What about him?" "He died," Caleb said. 2 weeks ago. Prison fever." Mara sat down slowly, the shirt forgotten in her lap. She waited for relief to come, but all she felt was a strange emptiness. "Good," she said finally, but the word felt hollow. Caleb sat beside her. "You all right?" "I don't know," Mara admitted. "I thought I'd feel different, like something would change." "Maybe nothing needs to change," Caleb said. "He's gone. You're here. That's all that matters." Mara nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd been carrying Gaines around with her all this time, like a weight she couldn't put down. And now that he was gone, she didn't know what to do with the space he'd left behind. That night, she lay awake long after everyone else had fallen asleep. She thought about the woman she'd been when she first met Caleb, desperate, broken, willing to die rather than keep fighting. And she thought about the woman she was now, surrounded by children who called her mama, and a man who'd built a life with her one day at a time. She'd survived. That was what mattered. Not because she'd been strong or brave or lucky, but because she'd refused to give up, even when it would have been easier, even when it would have made more sense. Beside her, Caleb stirred in his sleep, and Mara reached out to touch his shoulder. He was warm and solid, and she realized that she loved him, not in the desperate, clinging way she'd loved her first husband, but in a way that felt steady and sure, like coming home. The next morning, she told him. They were in the barn, mucking out the stalls, when Mara set down her shovel and said, "I need to tell you something." Caleb looked up, his expression cautious. "All right." "I love you," Mara said. The words felt strange in her mouth, like a language she'd forgotten how to speak. "I don't know when it happened or how, but I do, and I needed you to know." Caleb stood there for a long moment, and Mara's heart hammered in her chest. Then he crossed the space between them and kissed her, slow and careful, like he was afraid she might break. When he pulled back, he said, "I love you too. Have for a while now." Mara felt tears sting her eyes. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Didn't want to push," Caleb said. "Figured you'd tell me when you were ready." Mara laughed, shaky and breathless. "I'm ready." They stood there in the barn, holding each other, and Mara felt something inside her finally settle. Like a piece she'd been missing had clicked into place. Later that week, Caleb rode to Prescott and came back with a plain gold band. He didn't get down on one knee or make a speech. He just held it out to her and said, "Marry me." Mara took the ring and slipped it onto her finger. It was too big, but she didn't care. "Yes," she said. "Yes." They were married a month later in the small church in Redemption, with the children standing witness and half the territory in attendance. Mara wore a simple dress Ellen Garrett had helped her sew, and Caleb wore the cleanest shirt he owned. It wasn't fancy or elaborate, but it was theirs. When the preacher said the words and Caleb kissed her, Mara felt the weight of the past finally lift. She wasn't the woman who'd given up her children anymore. She wasn't the woman who'd pointed a gun at a stranger out of desperation. She was Mara Rourke, and she had a family, a home, and a future. The winter that followed was hard, but they were ready for it this time. The cellar was stocked with preserved food, the woodpile was twice as high as it needed to be, and the house was tight and warm. They spent the long evenings gathered around the fire, playing cards and telling stories, and Mara marveled at how different this winter was from the last. Samuel had started to open up more, sharing bits and pieces of his life before the ranch. He'd had a mother once, he said, but she died when he was young. His father had tried to raise him alone and failed. Samuel had ended up on the streets, then at Gaines's ranch, and now here. "I'm glad I'm here," he said one night, his voice quiet. "I know it's not perfect, but it's better than anything I've had before." "It's not perfect," Mara agreed, "but it's ours." Ruth was slower to share, but she clung to Lily like a lifeline, and Mara understood that. Sometimes the only way to heal was to hold on to someone who made you feel safe. Ben had grown into himself in a way that made Mara's chest ache with pride. He was strong and capable, but he was also kind, and he looked after Samuel and the girls like they were his responsibility. He didn't talk much about the ranch or the year he'd spent there, but Mara saw the way he flinched sometimes when a door slammed too loud, or the way he watched the horizon like he was waiting for something bad to come over it. "You know you're safe now, right?" she asked him one evening when they were alone. Ben nodded. "I know, but it's hard to forget." "You don't have to forget," Mara said. "You just have to keep living. That's how you win." Ben looked at her, and she saw understanding in his eyes. He knew what she meant. They'd both survived things that should have broken them, and they were still here. Spring came again, and with it came new challenges. A late frost killed half the garden, and one of the pigs got sick and died. Caleb broke his arm falling off the roof while repairing a leak, and Mara had to do most of the heavy work for 6 weeks while it healed. But they got through it, because that's what they did. They got through it. By summer, Caleb's arm was healed and the garden had recovered. They replanted and worked twice as hard, and by the time fall came around again, they had enough to see them through another winter. Mara stood in the kitchen one evening, looking out the window at the property they'd built together. The house stood solid and strong. The barn was freshly painted, and the fields stretched out in neat rows. The children were outside, playing some game that involved a lot of running and shouting, and Caleb was repairing a section of fence near the creek. This was her life now. Not the life she'd planned, not the life she'd dreamed of as a young woman, but a good life. A life she'd fought
This story was
and
posted
earned.
on the channel west of
Ellen
Betrayal.
Garrett came by the
Please
next
do not
week with her
repost
husband
it
and
in
their
any
3
form.
children. They'd become close over the past year, and Ellen had a way of making Mara laugh that reminded her she was more than just a mother and a wife. She was a person with thoughts and opinions and a sense of humor that had survived everything she'd been through. "You look happy," Ellen said as they sat on the porch, watching the children play. "I am," Mara said, and she meant it. "You've come a long way," Ellen said. "When I first met you at the barn raising, you looked like you were waiting for the world to end." Mara laughed. "I was. And now? Now I'm just living," Mara said. "One day at a time." Ellen nodded. "That's all any of us can do." That winter was easier than the ones before it. They had enough food, enough firewood, and enough experience to know what to expect. The children were healthy and strong, and the house felt less like a shelter and more like a home. But easy didn't mean simple. Lily got sick again in January, a fever that spiked so high Mara thought she might lose her. Caleb rode through a blizzard to get the doctor, and they spent 3 days watching Lily struggle to breathe, her small body burning up under every blanket they had. Mara didn't sleep. She sat beside Lily's bed, bathing her forehead with cold water and whispering to her, telling her to hold on, to keep fighting, to not give up, and Lily did. The fever broke on the 4th day, and she opened her eyes and asked for water. Mara cried so hard she couldn't speak, and Caleb had to take over, holding the cup to Lily's lips and murmuring reassurances. "I thought I was going to lose her," Mara said later, when Lily was asleep and they were sitting by the fire. "But you didn't," Caleb said. "I don't know if I could survive that," Mara admitted. "Losing one of them." "You could," Caleb said, "because you're stronger than you think." Mara shook her head. "I'm not strong. I'm just stubborn." "Same thing," Caleb said, and Mara almost smiled. By the time spring came around again, Mara had started to feel something she hadn't expected. Contentment. Not happiness, exactly. Happiness was too fragile, too dependent on circumstances. But contentment. The quiet satisfaction of knowing she'd built something that mattered. One afternoon in April, she was working in the garden when she heard hoofbeats. She looked up to see Marshall Hendricks riding toward the house, and her heart skipped. He'd retired months ago. Whatever brought him back couldn't be good. "Marshall," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "What's wrong?" Hendricks dismounted, and Mara saw that he looked older, tired. "Nothing's wrong," he said. "I just wanted to check in, see how you folks were doing." "We're doing fine," Mara said, relaxing slightly. "Why the visit?" "Because I'm old, and I wanted to see the people I helped before I forget who they are," Hendricks said with a wry smile. "Mind if I sit?" They sat on the porch, and Hendricks looked out at the property. "You've done well here." "We've tried," Mara said. "I remember when I first met you," Hendricks said. "You looked like a ghost, like you were barely holding on." "I was barely holding on," Mara said. "And now?" "Now I'm holding on just fine," Mara said. "Better than fine, actually." Hendricks nodded. "I'm glad. You deserve better than what you got." "I don't know about that," Mara said, "but I'm grateful for what I have." Hendricks stayed for dinner, and Mara watched as he talked with Caleb and the children, laughing at their stories and asking them about their lives. He looked at them the way a grandfather might, with pride and affection, and Mara realized he'd been watching over them all this time, making sure they were safe.
This story was posted on the
making sure
channel
they had a
west of
chance.
Betrayal.
Before he left,
Please
he
do not
pulled Mara
repost
aside.
it in any form.
"You know, there are a lot of people out there who could use what you've built here, kids like Samuel and Ruth, people who need a place to land." "Are you asking us to take in more children?" Mara asked. "I'm saying you've got room," Hendricks said, "and you've got experience. If you ever wanted to help others the way you were helped, there's a need for it." Mara thought about that after he left. She and Caleb talked about it late into the night, weighing the pros and cons, trying to decide if they could handle more. "We're barely managing as it is," Mara said. "We've been barely managing since the beginning," Caleb said, "and we're still here." "You really think we could do it?" "I think we could try," Caleb said, "and if it doesn't work, we figure something else out, same as always." Mara nodded. "All right, let's try." Over the next year, they took in 3 more children. A boy named Thomas, who'd lost his family to cholera. A girl named Anna, whose father had abandoned her. And a baby, barely a year old, whose mother had died in childbirth, and whose father couldn't care for her. The house was loud and chaotic and full of life. Mara and Caleb worked harder than they ever had, juggling 7 children and a farm and the constant demands of daily life. There were days when Mara wanted to scream, when she felt overwhelmed and exhausted and ready to give up. But she didn't give up, because she'd learned something important over the past few years. She'd learned that strength wasn't about never falling down. It was about getting back up, again and again and again. And she'd learned that love wasn't a feeling, it was a choice, a decision you made every single day to show up, to do the work, to care for the people who needed you even when it was hard. One evening, as she sat on the porch watching the children play, Caleb came and sat beside her. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Any of it?" "Regret what?" "This," Caleb said, gesturing at the house, the children, the life they'd built. "It's not what you signed up for." Mara thought about it. She thought about the woman she'd been in the desert, pointing a gun at a stranger because she didn't know what else to do. She thought about the choices she'd made, the mistakes, the pain, the fear. "No," she said finally, "I don't regret it. Not any of it." "Even the hard parts?" "Especially the hard parts," Mara said, "because the hard parts are what made this possible." Caleb nodded, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains. The years passed, and the children grew. Ben left first, heading to Prescott to work as an apprentice blacksmith. He came back to visit every few months, and Mara could see the man he was becoming, strong, capable, kind. Samuel followed a year later, finding work on a ranch to the north. He wrote letters, and Mara kept every single one. Lily and Ruth stayed longer, helping with the younger children and learning to run the household. Anna grew into a fierce, independent girl who reminded Mara of herself. Thomas became the kind of son who could fix anything and never complained about the work. The baby, whom they'd named Grace, grew into a bright, curious child who followed Caleb everywhere and called him Papa without hesitation. Mara watched them all, these children who'd been broken and discarded and forgotten, and she saw what they'd become. Not perfect, not without scars, but whole. And that was enough. One spring morning, when Mara was 43 and Caleb was nearing 50, they stood together on the porch and looked out at the land they'd claimed. "You think we did it right?" Mara asked. "I think we did the best we could," Caleb said. "That's not the same thing." "No," Caleb agreed, "but it's close enough." Mara leaned against him and he put his arm around her shoulders. They'd been married for over a decade now, and she still marveled at the fact that he'd stayed, that he'd chosen her over and over again, even when it would have been easier to walk away. "I love you," she said. "I love you too," Caleb said. "Always have, always will." Lily came out onto the porch, carrying Grace on her hip. "Mama, Ruth wants to know if we're going to the Garretts for supper tonight." "We are," Mara said. "Tell her to get everyone ready." Lily nodded and went back inside, and Mara smiled. This was her life now. Not quiet, not simple, but full. Full of noise and chaos and love and work and all the messy, complicated, beautiful things that made a life worth living. That evening, as they loaded the wagon to head to the Garretts, Thomas came running from the barn. "Mama, one of the horses is limping," he said. Mara sighed. "Of course it is. Caleb, can you—" "I'll check it," Caleb said, already heading toward the barn. Anna appeared with a basket of food. "I packed extra bread. Figured the Garretts would appreciate it." "Good thinking," Mara said. Grace tugged on Mara's skirt. "Mama, can I bring my doll?" "You can bring your doll," Mara said. It took another 20 minutes to get everyone settled and the wagon loaded, and by the time they finally set off, the sun was starting to dip toward the horizon. But Mara didn't mind. She sat beside Caleb on the wagon seat, the children chattering behind them, and she felt a deep sense of peace. The Garrett's house was warm and welcoming, filled with the smell of roasted chicken and fresh bread. Ellen hugged Mara tight and ushered them all inside, where the table was already set and the other guests were arriving. Mara found herself surrounded by people she'd come to know and care about over the years. Neighbors, friends, the kind of community that didn't just tolerate you but actively wanted you there. It was a far cry from the isolation she'd felt when she first came to this territory, and she didn't take it for
This
granted.
story was posted on
After
the
dinner,
channel west
the adults
of
gathered on the
Betrayal.
porch while the
Please do
children
not
played in the
repost
yard.
it in any form.
Ellen poured coffee, and Mara accepted a cup gratefully. "You look happy," Ellen said, echoing the words she'd spoken years ago. "I am," Mara said. "Tired, but happy." "That's all we can ask for, isn't it?" Ellen said. "To be tired and happy." Mara laughed. "I suppose it is." Caleb joined them, and they sat together watching the children chase each other around the yard. Grace was holding hands with one of the Garrett children, her laughter ringing out clear and bright. "You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that day?" Mara asked Caleb quietly. "What day?" "The day I tried to rob you." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but not often." "What do you think would have happened?" "I think you would have figured something out," Caleb said. "You're too stubborn to have given up." Mara smiled. "Maybe, but I'm glad I didn't have to find out." "Me too," Caleb said. They sat there as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and Mara thought about the journey that had brought them here. It hadn't been easy. It hadn't been smooth. But it had been worth it. Later that night, after they'd returned home and put the children to bed, Mara stood in the doorway of the main room and looked around. The house was cluttered and messy, with toys scattered across the floor and dishes piled in the sink. But it was full of life, and that was what mattered. Caleb came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything," Mara said. "How far we've come. How much has changed." "You ever wish things were different?" Mara thought about it. She thought about the woman she'd been before, the one who'd given up her children because she thought she had no other choice. The one who'd been so desperate she'd pointed a gun at a stranger, the one who'd wanted to die rather than keep fighting. "No," she said finally. "I don't wish things were different, because if they were, I wouldn't have this. I wouldn't have you. I wouldn't have them." Caleb kissed the top of her head. "Then I'd say we did all right." "Yeah," Mara said. "We did." The truth is, life doesn't hand out second chances just because you deserve them. Mara didn't earn her redemption by being brave or strong or noble. She earned it by refusing to quit, even when quitting would have been easier. She earned it by accepting help when it was offered, even though it terrified her. She earned it by choosing every single day to keep moving forward. And that's the thing most people don't understand about survival. It's not about being fearless. It's about being afraid and doing it anyway. It's about falling down and getting back up. It's about making mistakes and learning from them. It's about accepting that you're flawed and broken and imperfect and deciding that's okay, that you're still worth fighting for. Mara had learned that lesson the hard way. She'd learned that strength wasn't about never needing help. It was about having the courage to ask for it. She'd learned that family wasn't just about blood. It was about the people who chose to stand beside you, even when things got hard. And she'd learned that home wasn't a place. It was a feeling, the feeling of being seen, of being valued, of being loved for exactly who you are. The homestead stood strong on the land they'd claimed, a testament to everything they'd built together. The house had weathered storms and snow and the relentless Arizona sun, and it was still standing, just like Mara, just like Caleb, just like all the children they'd taken in and given a chance. Years later, when Mara was old and gray, she sat on that same porch and watched her grandchildren play in the yard. Ben had come back with his wife and children, and Samuel had brought his family down from the north. Lily and
This
Ruth
story
lived
was
nearby with
posted
their
on
own
the channel
families,
west
and the
of
house was
Betrayal.
once again filled
Please
with
do not
noise and
repost
laughter
it
and
in any
life.
form.
Caleb sat beside her, his hair silver and his hands gnarled with arthritis, but his eyes still bright and sharp. "You think we did good?" Mara asked, the same question she'd asked him so many times over the years. "I think we did our best," Caleb said, "and that's all that matters." Mara nodded. She thought about all the years that had passed, all the struggles and triumphs, all the moments of joy and pain, and everything in between. And she realized that this messy, imperfect, beautiful life was exactly what she'd been fighting for all along. Not perfection, not ease, just the chance to live, to love, to matter. And in the end, that was enough. Grace came running up to the porch, now a young woman with children of her own. "Grandma, can you tell us a story?" Mara smiled. "What kind of story?" "The one about how you and Grandpa met," Grace said. "The one about the desert." Mara glanced at Caleb, who raised an eyebrow. They told that story 100 times, and it never got old. All right, Mara said, but you have to promise to listen all the way through. We promise, Grace said, settling down on the porch step with her children gathered around her. Mara took a breath and began. It started with a gun and a man who should have known better than to stop. I was desperate, half dead, and out of options. And he was just a traitor trying to make his way across the territory. I pointed that gun at him, fully intending to take everything he had. But when I collapsed, he caught me. And that one moment of kindness changed everything. The children listened, their eyes wide, and Mara felt Caleb's hand slip into hers. The thing about kindness, Mara continued, is that it doesn't always make sense. It doesn't always come at the right time or from the right person. But when it does come, it can change the entire course of your life. Caleb didn't owe me anything. He didn't know me. But he chose to help me anyway. And that choice gave me something I'd lost a long time before: hope. She paused, looking out at the land they'd built together, at the legacy they'd created. We all make mistakes, Mara said. We all have moments we're not proud of. But those moments don't define us. What defines us is what we do next. Whether we give up or keep fighting, whether we accept help or push it away, whether we choose to build something new or stay stuck in the past. Grace nodded, understanding in her eyes. Your grandpa and I, we built this place from nothing, Mara said. We took something broken and made it whole. And we did it by choosing, every single day, to show up for each other, to do the work, to keep going, even when it was hard. She looked at Caleb, and he smiled at her. That's what love is, Mara said. Not some grand gesture or perfect moment. It's the everyday choice to stay, to fight, to build something that matters. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the yard. The children had fallen quiet, absorbing the story, and Mara felt a deep sense of peace. Remember that, she said, when life gets hard, and it will get hard, remember that you have a choice. You can give up, or you can keep fighting. You can stay stuck, or you can move forward. You can close yourself off, or you can let people in. She squeezed Caleb's hand. And whatever you choose, Mara said, make sure it's worth fighting for. The children nodded, and Grace hugged her grandmother tight. Mara closed her eyes and held on, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face and the solid presence of Caleb beside her. This was her legacy. Not the land or the house or the money they'd saved, but the people. The children they'd raised, the family they'd built, the love they'd shared. That was what would last long after she was gone, and it was more than enough. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Mara leaned back in her chair and let herself simply be. She'd spent so many years running, fighting, struggling to survive. But now, finally, she could rest. Not because the work was done, it never was, but because she'd learned to find peace in the doing. Caleb shifted beside her, and she felt him squeeze her hand. You all right? He asked quietly. Yeah, Mara said. I'm all right. And she meant it. After everything she'd been through, all the pain and loss and fear, she'd found something she'd never thought possible. She'd found home. Not in a place, but in the people around her, in the man who'd chosen to help a desperate stranger, in the children who'd called her mama, even when she felt like she didn't deserve it, in the community that had welcomed her when she had nothing to offer. That was the real miracle. Not that she'd survived, but that she'd learned how to live. And as she sat there on the porch, surrounded by the people she loved, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast Arizona sky, Mara Vale Rourke finally understood what it meant to be free. Free from the past. Free from the fear. Free from the belief that she wasn't worthy of love or happiness or a second chance. She was worthy. They all were. And that was the truth she wanted to pass down to the next generation. That no matter how broken you are, no matter how far you've fallen, you can always rebuild. You can always start again. You can always choose to fight for something better. It won't be easy. It won't be perfect. But it will be yours. And in the end, that's all that really matters.